The stagecoach door swung open, and Caleb Donovan's heart stopped. The woman who stepped into the Montana dust wasn't the fresh-faced bride he'd imagined. Beneath her torn veil, purple bruises painted a map of violence across her delicate face. Her trembling fingers clutched a blood-stained note that would change everything. She seeks safety more than marriage. Behind them, in the shadows of Silver Butte, a man in a fine Boston coat was already asking questions. Time was running out, and Caleb had one choice to make. Stay with me until the end of this incredible journey, and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The Montana sky stretched endless and blue the morning Caleb Donovan found the letter wedged in his mailbox, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor and a lifetime from the man he used to be. His calloused fingers, hands that had built fences, broken horses, and buried a dream or two, trembled slightly as he recognized the lavender-scented envelope. 8 years. 8 long years since he'd heard a woman's laughter in his cabin, since he'd cooked for anyone but himself, since he'd dared to imagine a future that held more than solitude and the endless work of keeping a ranch alive in the unforgiving wilderness. The letter was brief, businesslike, yet it ignited something in his chest he'd thought long dead. Mr. Donovan, your correspondence has been received and reviewed. Miss Lillian Hart of Boston, Massachusetts, has accepted your proposal of marriage. She will arrive in Silver Butte on the 15th of June, 1883, via the Overland Stage Company. We trust this arrangement will prove satisfactory to all parties involved. Regards, the Westward Hearts Marriage Agency. Caleb read it 3 times, standing in the morning sun that painted his weathered ranch house gold. The wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. 3 days, he muttered, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into his shirt pocket close to his heart. 3 days to become the kind of man a woman from Boston might not immediately regret. The cabin that had been adequate for a lonely rancher suddenly seemed rough, primitive, almost embarrassing. He spent the next 72 hours in a frenzy of preparation that his horses watched with what seemed like amused skepticism. He scrubbed floors that hadn't seen a proper cleaning in months, whitewashed the porch rails, fixed the squeaky hinge on the front door, and even attempted to sew a curtain for the spare bedroom window, an endeavor that resulted in something that looked less like a curtain and more like a flag of surrender. He shaved carefully that final morning, nicking himself twice in his nervousness, and put on his only good shirt, the blue one he'd bought in town 2 Christmases ago and had worn exactly once. His reflection in the cracked mirror showed a man of 32 who looked older in some ways, younger in others. The Montana sun had carved lines around his eyes, but those eyes themselves still held a clarity, an honesty that he hoped might count for something. The ride into Silver Butte took an hour, and every minute of it was torture. What if she took one look at him and climbed right back on that stage? What if the picture he'd sent, 5 years old and taken on his one trip to Bozeman, had been too flattering? What if she was expecting a gentleman and got a rancher whose idea of culture was a week-old newspaper and whose idea of fine dining was when he remembered to add salt to his beans? Silver Butte wasn't much of a town, a main street of packed dirt, a handful of buildings that included Thornton's General Store, the Silver Dollar Saloon, the Buckeye Hotel, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and the sheriff's office where Avery Colton kept a loose kind of order. Maybe 200 people called it home, and every one of them seemed to know Caleb's business. "Today's the day, ain't it, Donovan?" called out Frank Thornton from the porch of his store, a knowing grin splitting his weathered face. "Your mail-order bride coming in on the noon stage?" Caleb felt heat creep up his neck. "Mind your own business, Frank." "Hell, Caleb, you made it everybody's business when you went looking for a wife from one of them catalogs." Frank slapped his knee, delighted. "We're all curious what kind of woman answers an ad from a Montana rancher." "The desperate kind, probably," muttered old Pete Harrison, who spent most of his days in a chair outside the saloon, commenting on life as it passed him by. "No offense, Donovan, but what woman in her right mind leaves civilization for this?" Caleb tried to ignore them, but the words burrowed under his skin. What kind of woman, indeed? He'd been asking himself the same question for months, ever since he'd scraped together the fee and sent his letter to the agency. He'd been honest in his correspondence, maybe too honest. He told her about the ranch, about the isolation, about the harsh winters and the endless work. He told her he wasn't a rich man, that he couldn't offer luxury, but that he could offer loyalty, safety, and a home. Her responses had been brief but kind. She wrote in an educated hand about Boston, about loving books and music, about wanting a fresh start out west. She never explained why she wanted that fresh start, and Caleb hadn't pressed. Everyone who came west was running from something or toward something. Sometimes both. The stage was late. Caleb sat on the bench outside the hotel, his hat in his hands, turning it over and over until the brim was nearly shapeless. Noon came and went. 1 o'clock, 1:30. Maybe she changed her mind, Pete offered helpfully. Maybe she got as far as St. Louis and thought better of it. Stage is just late, Pete. Happens all the time. But Caleb's stomach churned with doubt. What if the old man was right? Then at 2:15, the sound he'd been waiting for, the thunder of hooves and the rattle of wheels. The overland stage came barreling down the main street in a cloud of dust, the driver whooping and cracking his whip more for show than necessity. The 6 horses were lathered and tired, and the coach itself was covered in the grime of 1,000 miles. Caleb stood slowly, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. His mouth went dry. This was it. This was the moment that would determine the rest of his life. The driver, a grizzled man named Hank who'd been running this route for 20 years, set the brake and climbed down with a grunt. "Afternoon, folks. Got mail, got supplies, and got 1 passenger for Silver Butte." The door of the coach opened, and time seemed to slow down. A hand appeared first, small, delicate, wearing a lace glove that was torn and dirty. Then a boot, practical but feminine, stepping down onto the mounting block. Then she emerged fully into the Montana sunlight, and Caleb's world tilted on its axis. She was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair that might have once been pinned up elegantly, but now fell in disheveled waves around her shoulders. She wore a traveling dress of dark blue that had seen better days. It was rumpled, stained with what looked like dried blood on the sleeve. But it was her face that stopped Caleb's breath in his chest. Even through the torn veil that hung from her small hat, he could see the bruises. Purple and yellow marks painted the left side of her face. Her bottom lip was split and swollen. One eye was ringed with the fading green of an older injury. Her hands, even in their torn gloves, trembled visibly. She looked like someone who'd been through a war and lost. The small crowd that had gathered to see the mail-order bride fell silent. Even Pete had nothing to say. Caleb heard Frank Thornton's wife gasp, "Oh, that poor girl." Lillian Hart, because it could only be her, stood frozen on the mounting block, her eyes sweeping the crowd with something that looked like panic. She was clearly searching for someone, but also clearly terrified of being seen. It was the look of a hunted animal. Hank, the driver, cleared his throat uncomfortably and pulled an envelope from his coat. "Which one of you fellas is Caleb Donovan?" Caleb's legs felt like fence posts, but he forced himself forward. "That's me." "This here's for you then, from the agency." Hank practically thrust the envelope at him and stepped back, as if whatever trouble this woman carried might be contagious. Caleb took the envelope but didn't open it. His eyes were locked on Lillian's face, what he could see of it through the veil. Her eyes were remarkable, even in her fear, a deep hazel that seemed to hold entire worlds of pain and determination. She was looking at him now, trying to read him, trying to determine if he was another danger or possibly, a refuge. "Miss Hart?" he said gently, his voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in his chest. She nodded, a tiny movement. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, rough as if she'd been screaming or crying or both. "Mr. Donovan?" "Yes, ma'am." She swayed slightly, catching herself on the coach. The journey had clearly taken everything she had. "I apologize. I know I'm not what you were expecting. If you want to send me back, I'll understand. I can work to pay for the return fare. I can—" "Open the letter, Donovan," Hank interrupted, nervous energy making him talkative. "You'll want to read what it says." The crowd pressed closer, shameless in their curiosity. Caleb felt anger flash through him at their gawking, at the way they were treating this woman's obvious suffering as entertainment. But he tore open the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The note was brief, written in the same business-like hand as his original letter. Mr. Donovan, circumstances have required a change in the arrangement. Miss Hart comes to you not as a conventional bride, but as a woman in desperate need of protection. She seeks safety more than marriage. We trust your character is such that you will not take advantage of her vulnerability. The agency considers its obligation fulfilled upon her safe delivery. What happens next is between you and God. May He grant you both peace. Caleb read it twice, his jaw tightening. Then he looked up at Lillian, who had wrapped her arms around herself despite the summer heat, as if she could make herself smaller, less visible, less of a problem. The whole town was watching. He could feel their eyes, their judgment, their gossip already forming. He could send her back. It would be the practical thing, maybe even the smart thing. He'd wanted a wife, a partner, someone to build a life with. This woman looked like she could barely hold herself together, much less help run a ranch. This was not what he'd signed up for. But then their eyes met again, and he saw something beneath the fear. He saw strength, the kind of strength it took to survive whatever had put those bruises on her face. He saw intelligence in the way she was assessing him, cataloging every detail, preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. He saw courage in the simple fact that she was still standing, still breathing, still trying. And he saw himself 8 years ago, broken and alone, wondering if anyone in the world gave a damn if he lived or died. The decision took less than a heartbeat. Caleb folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance between them until he stood at the base of the mounting block, looking up at her. He pulled off his hat. His mother had raised him with manners, after all, and spoke clearly enough for the whole town to hear. Miss Hart, my name is Caleb Donovan. I own a ranch about an hour's ride from here. It's not fancy, but it's solid and it's safe. I've got a spare room you can have for as long as you need it. No expectations, no obligations. You can rest, heal, and decide what you want to do next. And I give you my word, he paused, making sure she heard the weight of his promise, that no one will hurt you there. You're not alone now. A sound escaped her, half gasp, half sob. Her hand flew to her mouth, and he saw tears spill from her eyes, cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. For a long moment she just stared at him, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd heard. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. You would do that? For a stranger? Yes, ma'am. I would. Why? It was a fair question. Caleb considered it, aware that the whole town was hanging on his answer. Because someone did it for me once. Because it's the right thing to do. And because he managed a small smile. I could use some help around the place, and you look like someone who pays her debts. That almost got a smile from her. Almost. Instead, she took a shaky breath and nodded. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Donovan. Thank you. He reached up to help her down from the mounting block. She hesitated for just a second before placing her small hand in his larger one. Even through their gloves, he could feel how cold she was, how she shook. He helped her step down carefully, and when she stumbled slightly, her legs weak from days in the coach, he caught her elbow to steady her. Easy now. When's the last time you ate? I'm not sure. Yesterday? Maybe the day before. Caleb looked at Hank. She got any bags? 2 trunks on top, both marked Hart. I'll get them loaded on my wagon. He turned to Lillian. First, we're getting you some food. Thornton's wife makes a decent sandwich, and no! The word came out sharp, panicked. Lillian was looking past him at the crowd, at the way they were staring, whispering. Please, I just want to go. I can't be around all these people. Caleb understood. He'd felt that way himself once. All right, I've got supplies in the wagon. We'll head home. The crowd parted reluctantly as Caleb led Lillian toward his wagon, which was hitched in front of the general store. Behind them, the whispers started immediately. Did you see her face? What kind of trouble is she bringing to our town? Donovan's a fool for taking her in. The girl's been beaten within an inch of her life. Wonder who did it? Wonder if he's following her. Caleb gritted his teeth and ignored them all. He helped Lillian up onto the wagon seat, then went to collect her trunks. They were heavy, packed with the remnants of whatever life she'd fled. Hank and Frank helped him load them into the wagon bed without comment, though their eyes were full of questions. Sheriff Avery Colton approached as Caleb was securing the last trunk. Avery was a good man, fair and honest, and one of the few people in Silver Butte whose opinion Caleb actually valued. "Caleb, a word?" Caleb glanced at the wagon, where Lillian sat rigid and pale, staring at her hands. "Make it quick, Avery." "You sure you know what you're doing? That woman's clearly running from something. Might be she's bringing trouble to your doorstep." "Then I'll deal with it." "I'm serious. She shows up beaten half to death. No explanation. No—" "She doesn't owe us an explanation." Caleb's voice came out harder than he intended. "She's hurt, she's scared, and she needs help. That's all I need to know." Avery studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if trouble does come looking for her, you come get me. Don't try to handle it alone." "I won't. You have my word." They shook hands, and Caleb climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Lillian. He unwrapped the reins from the brake and clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched into motion, carrying them away from Silver Butte's prying eyes and toward the mountains. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes. Caleb kept stealing glances at his passenger, who sat stiff and still, her hands clenched in her lap. She was holding herself together through sheer will, he realized. One wrong word, one unexpected movement, and she might shatter completely. The road climbed gradually into the foothills, following Silver Creek through stands of pine and aspen. The afternoon sun painted everything gold and green. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. In any other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Finally, Lillian spoke. "You must think I'm pathetic." No, ma'am, I don't. I'm not usually so weak. I used to be stronger than this." "You're still strong. You survived whatever put those marks on you. You got on a stage and traveled 2,000 miles into country you don't know to meet a man you'd never seen. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." She turned to look at him for the first time, really look at him. He kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to study him without feeling threatened. "The letter I sent," she said quietly. "The one that brought me here. It wasn't entirely honest. I figured. I told you I wanted a fresh start. That was true. But I didn't tell you why." She took a shaky breath. "I didn't tell you I was running for my life." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice stayed calm. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." "But I should. You deserve to know what you've taken on." She paused, gathering courage. "My uncle, he's the one who did this." "Who?" "Him and the man he tried to force me to marry." Rage, white-hot and violent, flashed through Caleb's chest. He tamped it down, forced his breathing to stay even. "They're in Boston?" "Yes, at least they were. I don't know if they followed me. I tried to be careful. I changed coaches 3 times, used different names. But my uncle has money, connections. If he wants to find me badly enough." "He won't take you back." Caleb said it like a vow. "I meant what I said in town. You're safe with me." Lillian was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I could be lying. I could be a thief or a murderer or—" "Are you?" "No." "Then that's settled." He risked a small smile. "Besides, I'm a pretty good judge of character. Comes from working with horses. They don't lie about who they are." That got a tiny huff of laughter from her, the first hint that there was life and humor still buried under all that fear and pain. "You're comparing me to a horse?" "Only in the best ways, ma'am." They crested a rise, and Caleb's ranch spread out before them. It wasn't much by Boston standards, he was sure, but he'd built it with his own hands, and he was proud of it. The cabin sat in a clearing beside Silver Creek, solid and square, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. The barn and corral were well maintained. Fenced pastures held his small herd of horses. Mountains rose up behind it all, purple and eternal. "Oh," Lillian breathed. "It's beautiful." "It's home," Caleb said simply. He drove the wagon across the creek at the shallow ford and pulled up in front of the cabin. "Welcome to the Rocking D Ranch, Miss Hart." He helped her down from the wagon, noting how exhausted she looked. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was wearing off, leaving behind bone-deep fatigue. "The spare room's the second door on the right," he said. "I'll get your trunks. You go on in and rest." "I should help." You should rest, he said firmly but gently. There will be plenty of time for everything else. Right now, you need to sleep. She nodded, too tired to argue, and made her way slowly up the porch steps. Caleb watched her go, this broken, brave woman who'd stumbled into his life and somehow, in the span of a few hours, changed everything. The cabin door closed behind her. Caleb stood in the afternoon sun, listening to the creek and the wind in the pines, and wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Then he smiled, shook his head, and started unloading the trunks. One thing was certain, life on the Rocking D was never going to be the same. The sun was sinking behind the mountains when Caleb finally finished unloading both trunks and setting them carefully inside Lillian's room. She'd already collapsed onto the narrow bed, still fully clothed, one arm flung across her face as if even in sleep she needed to protect herself. He'd covered her with a quilt his mother had made years ago, then retreated quietly, closing the door with barely a whisper of sound. The cabin felt different already. After 8 years of silence broken only by his own footsteps and the occasional creak of settling timber, there was now the soft sound of someone else breathing in the next room. It was strange, unsettling, and somehow deeply right in a way he couldn't quite explain. Caleb stood in his small kitchen, staring at the cold stove, trying to remember the last time he'd cooked a proper meal. Most nights he made do with beans, salt pork, and whatever vegetables he could coax from his stubborn garden. But tonight felt different. Tonight he had a guest, a woman who'd traveled 2,000 miles, and who looked like she hadn't had a decent meal in weeks. He built up the fire, set water to boil, and started pulling together ingredients. His hands moved automatically through tasks he'd done 1,000 times, but his mind kept drifting to the woman sleeping in his spare room. The bruises on her face told a story of violence that made his blood boil. The fear in her eyes spoke of betrayal by someone who should have protected her. And yet beneath all that damage, he'd glimpsed something remarkable, a core of steel that hadn't been broken despite someone's best efforts. The stew was simmering and fresh bread was in the oven when he heard the first sound from her room, a whimper, high and frightened, then a cry. Caleb froze, his hand on the spoon he'd been using to stir the pot. The sound came again, louder now, the desperate, wordless sound of someone trapped in a nightmare. He crossed the cabin in 3 strides and knocked on her door. "Miss Hart, you all right?" The only answer was another cry, ragged with terror. Caleb hesitated for only a second before pushing the door open. Lillian was tangled in the quilt, thrashing as if fighting off invisible attackers. Her face was contorted in fear, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No," she gasped. "Please, no, don't! Uncle Edward, please!" "Miss Hart." Caleb approached carefully, keeping his voice low and steady. "Lillian, wake up. You're safe. It's just a dream." She didn't hear him. Her hands came up, pushing at something only she could see. "I won't marry him. You can't make me." Caleb knelt beside the bed, close enough to reach her but not touching. He'd seen men come back from the war with night terrors. He knew better than to grab someone caught in that particular hell. "Lillian, listen to my voice. You're in Montana. You're at the Rocking D Ranch. No one's going to hurt you here. You're safe." He kept talking, kept repeating it, until finally her eyes flew open. For a terrible moment she looked at him without recognition, seeing only another threat. Then awareness flooded back, and with it, crushing embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she gasped, pushing herself upright and wiping frantically at her tears. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "You've got nothing to apologize for. Bad dreams happen, especially after what you've been through." He stood slowly, giving her space. "How long since you've slept in a real bed?" 5 days, maybe?" "The coaches, they didn't stop much, and when they did, I was afraid to sleep, afraid someone might recognize me." "Well, you can sleep here, and I'll keep watch if it makes you feel better." She looked at him with those remarkable hazel eyes, searching his face for deception or ulterior motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because some of the tension left her shoulders. "You meant it, didn't you, when you said I was safe here?" "Yes, ma'am, I did." "Why?" The question came out raw, desperate. "I don't understand why you're helping me. What do you want in return?" Caleb considered his answer carefully. "I want you to heal. I want you to stop looking over your shoulder like a hunted animal. And I want you to know that not every man in the world is like whoever hurt you." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these seemed different somehow, less about pain and more about relief. "I'd forgotten," she whispered. "I'd forgotten there were good men in the world." "Come on," he said gently. "I've got stew cooking and bread in the oven. You need to eat something before you fade away to nothing." She followed him into the main room on unsteady legs, still wearing her rumpled traveling dress. In the lamplight, the full extent of her injuries was more visible. Beyond the obvious bruises on her face, there were marks on her arms, shadows of finger-shaped bruises around her wrists. Caleb felt that rage flare again, but pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help her now. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one in front of her at the rough wooden table. She stared at it for a moment, as if she'd forgotten what food looked like. "It's not fancy," he apologized. "Just beef stew with potatoes and carrots, but it's hot, and it'll stick to your ribs." "It smells like heaven." She picked up the spoon with a hand that still trembled slightly and took a careful bite. Her eyes closed. "Oh God, I can't remember the last time I had something that wasn't stale bread or questionable jerky." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Caleb watched her from under his lashes, noting how she ate, quickly at first, as if someone might take the food away, then more slowly as she realized no one would. She had 3 helpings before finally pushing back from the table with a sigh. "I'm going to explode," she said, and there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. "But it would be a happy death. There's bread too if you want it." "I couldn't possibly," but her eyes lingered on the golden loaf he'd pulled from the oven. "Well, maybe just a small piece." Caleb cut her a thick slice and watched with satisfaction as she devoured it with butter. Color was coming back to her cheeks. She looked more alive than she had in town, though exhaustion still hung on her like a cloak. "Tell me about the ranch," she said suddenly. "How long have you been here?" 8 years. Came out from Ohio after—" He paused, old pain flickering across his face. "After my wife died. Needed to get away from everything that reminded me of her. Came west, found this valley, and built the cabin with my own 2 hands. I'm sorry about your wife. It was a long time ago. Fever took her and our baby daughter. 1 week I had a family, the next I was alone." He took a drink of water, washing down the memory. "Anyway, I built this place from nothing. Started with 4 horses, now I've got 20. I break them, train them, sell them to folks who need good working animals. It's honest work." "You live here all alone? All this time?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well, until today." She looked around the cabin with new appreciation. It was simple but well made, everything in its place. Clean, organized, clearly the home of a man who took pride in his surroundings. "It's a good home," she said softly. "You should be proud." "Thank you." He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "The spare room is yours for as long as you need it. I'll sleep out here on the floor near the fire if it makes you more comfortable." "You will not!" She looked horrified. "This is your home. I'm not going to drive you from your own bed. I've slept in worse places, and I want you to feel safe." They argued about it for another 5 minutes before reaching a compromise. He'd sleep in his own room, but he'd leave both doors open, and she could call out if she needed anything. Lillian seemed satisfied with this arrangement, though Caleb suspected she wouldn't actually call for help even if the cabin was burning down around her. She had that kind of stubborn pride he recognized because he wore it himself. That night, lying in his own bed for the first time in what felt like forever with another person under his roof, Caleb found himself staring at the ceiling and listening for sounds of distress, for nightmares, for any sign that she needed help. But the cabin stayed quiet except for the usual night sounds. The creek outside, the wind in the pines, the occasional pop from the dying fire. Maybe, he thought just before sleep took him, maybe this would work out after all. Morning came with birdsong and the pale gold light of a new day. Caleb woke to a smell that had him sitting bolt upright in confusion. Coffee. Fresh, hot coffee. He pulled on his pants and boots and emerged from his room to find Lillian already up and moving around the kitchen. She'd changed into a simpler dress. Still dark, still modest, but less battered than yesterday's traveling clothes. Her hair was pinned up in a neat bun, though pieces escaped to frame her bruised face. She was standing at the stove, and she turned when she heard him, a tentative smile on her swollen lips. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you don't mind. I found the coffee and I thought, well, I wanted to make myself useful. Caleb rubbed his eyes, still not quite believing what he was seeing. You should be resting. I've rested enough. Besides, I told you in my letters, I can cook and clean and help around a house. I intend to earn my keep, Mr. Donovan. Caleb, he corrected, just Caleb, and you don't need to prove anything. Yes, I do. She turned back to the stove, her back stiff. I won't be a burden. I won't be helpless. I spent too many years in my uncle's house being told I was useless, decorative at best. I need to be useful now. Please. He heard the desperation under the determination and understood. She needed this, needed to feel like she had some control, some purpose. Taking that away from her would be cruel. All right, he said, but we do it together. This is a working ranch, and there's always more to do than one person can handle. So if you want to help, I'd be grateful. But the first sign you're pushing yourself too hard, we stop. Deal? She turned back to face him, relief written across her features. Deal. They shook on it, and Caleb was struck again by how small her hand was in his, how delicate she seemed despite the strength he knew she possessed. Then the moment passed, and they were just two people sharing coffee in the early morning light. The days fell into a rhythm. Caleb would rise with the sun and head out to tend the horses, mend fences, or tackle whatever other tasks the ranch demanded. Lillian would make breakfast, clean the cabin, tend the small garden that Caleb had been neglecting, and gradually begin to explore the boundaries of her new world. He watched her carefully those first few days, noting the way she'd startle at sudden sounds, how she'd position herself so she could always see the door, how she'd freeze whenever they heard hoofbeats in the distance. She was like a wild horse that had been broken badly, skittish, wary, ready to bolt at the slightest threat. But slowly, incrementally, she began to relax. The third morning, he found her sitting on the porch with her coffee, watching the sun paint the mountains pink and gold. The fourth day, she laughed at something, a genuine surprised laugh when one of his younger horses decided to investigate her garden and ended up with a mouthful of green beans. The fifth day, she asked if she could help him with the horses. You know horses? He asked, surprised. A little. We had a stable in Boston. The groom used to let me help when Uncle Edward wasn't watching. A shadow crossed her face at the mention of her uncle, but she pushed through it. I'm not expert, but I can brush them, feed them. I'd like to learn more. So Caleb taught her. He showed her how to approach a horse so it wouldn't spook, how to read their body language, how to tell when they were calm or nervous or testing boundaries. Lillian proved to be a quick study, patient and gentle with the animals in a way that made them trust her almost immediately. You've got a gift, he told her one afternoon as she carefully worked a brush through the mane of his oldest mare, a gentle bay named Daisy. Horses know when someone genuinely cares about them. They're easier than people, Lillian said quietly. They don't lie. They don't pretend to love you while planning to sell you to the highest bidder. Caleb set down the hoof pick he'd been using and looked at her. She'd been opening up more each day, letting small pieces of her story slip out, but she'd never said it quite so baldly before. Your uncle tried to sell you? She nodded, still focusing on Daisy's mane. There was a man. Horace Blackwood, 53 years old, twice widowed, looking for a young wife who could give him an heir. My uncle owed him money, gambling debts. Mr. Blackwood offered to forgive the debt if I would marry him. And you refused. I refused. Her hand stilled on the brush. So Uncle Edward decided to convince me. He started with words, told me I was selfish, ungrateful, that I owed him for taking me in after my parents died. When that didn't work, he moved to other methods. Caleb felt his jaw clench. He beat you. He and Mr. Blackwood both. They thought they could break me, force me to agree. And they almost did. Almost. She looked up then, meeting his eyes across Daisy's back. But there was a woman who worked for the marriage agency. Mrs. Chen. She'd come to Boston looking for women who wanted to go west, and she saw me one day in the market, saw the bruises I couldn't quite hide. She gave me her card, told me there was another way. So you wrote to the agency. I stole money from my uncle's desk, enough for the fee and the stage fare. I packed what I could carry and left in the middle of the night. Mrs. Chen helped me get to the coach station without being seen. She went back to brushing, but he could see tears gathering in her eyes. She saved my life. You both did. You saved yourself, Lillian. You made the choice to leave. That took more courage than anything I've done. She shook her head. You took in a stranger, a woman with bruises and secrets and nothing to offer but trouble. That's courage. That's just being human. They worked in silence for a while after that, each lost in their own thoughts. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that forms between people who are beginning to understand each other. That evening, after dinner, Lillian asked if she could look at his books. Caleb had a small collection, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, a few novels he'd read and reread until the pages were soft as cloth, and a Bible his mother had given him before he headed west. It's not much, he apologized. I know you're used to libraries and culture, and it's perfect. She pulled out a worn copy of Dickens and held it like a treasure. I haven't read anything in months. Uncle Edward said reading gave me ideas above my station. Read whatever you want. Consider it yours. She looked at him with something like wonder. You're a very unusual man, Caleb Donovan. I'm just a rancher who likes a quiet life. No. She set the book down carefully. You're a good man, and that's rarer than you think. The days turned into a week, then two. Summer deepened, bringing long golden evenings and the sweet smell of wildflowers. The bruises on Lillian's face faded from purple to yellow to nothing, though the split on her lip took longer to heal. She filled out slightly with regular meals, lost the gaunt, hollow-eyed look of someone who'd been running on empty for too long. She worked beside him every day, never complaining even when the tasks were difficult or unpleasant. She weeded the garden, learned to milk the cow he'd bought from a neighbor, mended his clothes with neat, precise stitches that were far better than anything he could have managed. She cooked meals that made him realize just how poorly he'd been eating for the past 8 years. Not fancy Boston cooking, but good solid food that stuck to the ribs and tasted like someone actually cared whether he lived or died. And slowly, day by day, the cabin that had been just a shelter became something more. It became a home. They talked in the evenings, sharing pieces of their pasts. Caleb told her about Ohio, about the farm where he'd grown up, about his wife Sarah and their baby girl who'd lived only 3 days. Lillian told him about Boston, about her parents who died in a cholera outbreak when she was 12, about the years living with her uncle and his wife who'd looked at her like an expensive inconvenience. I used to have dreams, she said one night as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. I wanted to be a teacher. I loved reading, loved learning. I thought maybe I could help children learn to love it too. What stopped you? My uncle. He said teaching was beneath our family's station. He wanted me to marry well, be a proper society wife, have tea parties and wear expensive dresses and produce heirs for whatever man he decided was suitable. Her voice was bitter. He never asked what I wanted. You could still teach, Caleb said. Silver Butte doesn't have a proper school teacher. Mrs. Peterson does her best, but she's got her hands full with the general store. They'd probably be grateful if someone with actual education wanted to help. You think so? There was hope in her voice, fragile and tentative. I think you could do anything you set your mind to. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm starting to believe that again. Being here, it's like I can breathe for the first time in years. Caleb understood. He felt it too, the sense that something broken was slowly being repaired. Not just in her, but in him too. He hadn't realized how lonely he'd been until he wasn't anymore. But peace never lasts forever, and trouble has a way of finding those who run from it. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Lillian's arrival, when Sheriff Avery Colton rode up to the ranch. Caleb was working with a young gelding in the corral, and Lillian was hanging laundry on the line she'd strung between 2 posts. They both looked up at the sound of approaching hooves. Avery dismounted slowly, his face grave. Caleb? Miss Hart. Avery. Caleb's stomach tightened. The sheriff didn't make social calls. What brings you out here? Had a visitor in town yesterday. Man from Boston, asking questions. Said he was looking for his niece who'd run away. Described her pretty accurately, dark hair, hazel eyes, about 5'3". Said her name was Lillian Hart, and she might be traveling under a false name. The color drained from Lillian's face. She took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat. Uncle Edward, she whispered. He found me. He's here? Caleb's voice came out harder than he'd intended. In Silver Butte? Was. He left this morning, said he was going to check the neighboring towns, but he'll be back. Avery looked at Lillian with sympathy. He showed me a picture. Said you were mentally unstable, had run away from a sanitarium. Said your family just wants you home safe. That's a lie. Lillian's voice shook but held firm. I was never in a sanitarium. He's the one who's dangerous. He tried to force me to marry a man I didn't love. When I refused, he beat me. Look, you can still see the marks. She pushed up her sleeves, showing the fading bruises on her arms. Avery's expression darkened. I believe you, he said quietly. The way that man talked, the way he looked, something wasn't right. But Lillian, he's got money and he's got papers. He says he's your legal guardian since you're unmarried and under 25. I'm 23, Lillian said, and I don't recognize his guardianship. I'm a grown woman. I should be able to decide my own fate. Should and legally can are two different things, especially out here where judges are few and far between. Avery looked at Caleb. He's going to come back with more men. He's going to try to take her. Caleb felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Like hell he will. Caleb, no. He stepped forward, placing himself between Avery and Lillian without even thinking about it. She came here for safety, and that's what she's going to get. I don't care what papers he's got or how much money he has. He's not taking her. If you resist, he can bring the law down on you. Could charge you with kidnapping, harboring a fugitive, all sorts of things that could cost you everything. Then let him try. Caleb, think about this. I have thought about it. Caleb's voice was calm but absolutely certain. 3 weeks ago, a terrified woman showed up on a stagecoach with bruises on her face and hope in her eyes. I made her a promise. I told her she was safe. I'm not breaking that promise. Lillian made a sound, half sob, half laugh. You can't throw away everything for me. This ranch, your life, what kind of life is it if I turn my back on someone who needs help? He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his own feelings reflected back. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, this had stopped being about duty or charity. This had become personal. Besides, there's a way around this. What way? Avery asked. Caleb kept his eyes on Lillian. We get married. For real this time. If she's my wife, he's got no legal claim. The words hung in the air between them. Lillian stared at him, her eyes wide. Caleb, you can't. That's not. I won't trap you into. You're not trapping me. I'm offering. He took a step closer to her. I know it's not what either of us planned. I know you came here looking for safety, not a husband. But if it keeps you safe from him, if it gives you the legal protection you need, then I'll do it, gladly. But you don't love me. We barely know each other. I know you're brave. I know you're kind. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met, and that you laugh at my terrible jokes, and that you care more about those horses than most people care about other people. He managed a smile. I know we could build something good here, given time. Maybe love comes later. Maybe it's already starting. Tears streamed down her face. You would do this? Tie yourself to me forever? I'd consider it an honor. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for doubt or deception. Then she turned to Avery. Would it work? Would it actually protect me? Legally, yes. If you're married, your husband becomes your guardian. Your uncle would have no claim. Avery hesitated. But Lillian, marriage is a serious thing. You can't just undo it if you change your mind later. I won't change my mind. She looked back at Caleb. If you're truly willing, if this is really what you want, then yes, I'll marry you. Caleb felt something warm spread through his chest. We'll need to do it soon, before he comes back. I can have everything ready by tomorrow morning, Avery said. I'll talk to Pastor Williams. We can do it at the church, quiet and quick. Thank you, Avery. The sheriff nodded, but his eyes were troubled. I hope you know what you're doing, Caleb. This man, he's not going to give up easily. Neither am I. After Avery left, Caleb and Lillian stood in the yard, not quite looking at each other. The weight of what they'd just agreed to hung between them. I should get back to work, Caleb said finally. I should finish the laundry. but neither of them moved. Finally, Lillian spoke. "Caleb, thank you for everything, for believing me, for protecting me, for being you. Don't thank me yet. We've still got to get through this. We will." She said it with a certainty that surprised them both. Together. That night, neither of them slept well. Caleb lay awake thinking about Sarah, about the life he'd lost and the unexpected chance he'd been given to build something new. He hoped she would understand, hoped she would approve of this woman who'd come into his life like a storm and changed everything. In her room, Lillian stared at the ceiling and tried not to let fear overwhelm her. Uncle Edward was close. He'd found her faster than she'd hoped, but tomorrow she would have protection, real, legal protection. And more than that, she would have Caleb, this good, unexpected man who'd looked at her bruised face and seen not a problem but a person worth saving. She thought about the marriage, about what it would mean. She didn't love him. Not yet. But she could. She was beginning to see how she could. And maybe that was enough. Maybe love that grew slowly from respect and kindness was stronger than love that flared hot and fast. Morning came too quickly and too slowly. Lillian wore the best dress she had, a simple gown of dark green that made her eyes look more green than brown. She pinned her hair up carefully, wishing she had flowers or ribbons or anything to make this feel more like a wedding and less like a desperate gambit. Caleb wore his good shirt again, and the vest he'd bought 2 years ago and never had occasion to wear. He'd shaved carefully, combed his hair, and tried not to look as nervous as he felt. They rode into town in the wagon, side by side but not touching. The sun was barely up, painting Silver Butte in shades of rose and gold. The town was quiet. Most folks were still asleep. Pastor Williams was waiting at the church with Avery and his wife Martha, who'd brought wildflowers from her garden. The pastor was a kind man in his 60s who'd seen enough of life to ask no questions about the hurried wedding. "Are we ready?" he asked gently. Caleb looked at Lillian. She was pale but composed, her chin lifted in that way he'd come to recognize as her gathering courage. "Ready?" she said. They stood before the simple wooden altar, and Pastor Williams began the ceremony. The words were familiar: love, honor, cherish, till death do us part. Caleb said his vows clearly, meaning every word. When it was Lillian's turn, her voice shook only slightly. "Do you, Caleb Donovan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Lillian Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Lillian met Caleb's eyes. In them she saw steadiness, protection, and something else, something that might, given time, become everything she'd stopped believing in. "I do," she whispered. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Caleb leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle, careful, full of promise. When they parted, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. They signed the register with Martha and Avery as witnesses. It was done. They were married, for better or worse, bound together by law and hope, and the desperate need to keep one step ahead of the darkness chasing them. As they left the church, the sun was fully up, flooding the world with light. Caleb helped Lillian into the wagon and climbed up beside her. This time, when the wheels started rolling, he reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his and held on tight, and together they headed home. The ride back to the ranch felt different than the ride into town. Lillian sat closer to Caleb now, their hands still intertwined on the wagon seat between them. Neither spoke much, both lost in the reality of what they'd just done. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the dew and warming the mountain air, but Lillian felt cold despite the heat. Marriage. She was married now, to a man she'd known for 3 weeks. A good man, yes, but still practically a stranger. And yet, when she looked at their joined hands, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not just because she now had legal protection from her uncle, but because she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time since her parents died 11 years ago, someone had chosen her, not because of duty or obligation or what they could get from her, but simply because they wanted to. "You're thinking too hard," Caleb said quietly, breaking the silence. "I can practically hear the wheels turning in your head." I'm trying to figure out if this is real or if I'm going to wake up back in Uncle Edward's house and discover this was all a dream. It's real. He squeezed her hand gently, and we're going to figure it out as we go. No expectations. Remember, we've got time. But time was something they didn't have much of. They'd barely made it back to the ranch and unhitched the horses when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. 3 riders, coming fast from the direction of town. Caleb saw them at the same moment Lillian did. His jaw tightened. Get inside. Caleb, please, just until I see who it is and what they want. Lillian wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him, but she also recognized the wisdom in his request. If it was her uncle, seeing her immediately might provoke a confrontation that could turn violent. She hurried into the cabin but positioned herself by the window where she could see and hear everything. The 3 riders pulled up in the yard in a cloud of dust. The man in the lead was tall and heavy-set, wearing an expensive suit that was completely inappropriate for Montana territory. He had steel gray hair, cold blue eyes, and a thin mouth that looked like it had never smiled in its life. Even from a distance, even after 3 weeks of safety, Lillian felt her stomach clench with recognition and fear. Uncle Edward. The 2 men flanking him were clearly hired muscle, rough-looking characters with guns on their hips and expressions that suggested they were paid to intimidate. One was short and stocky with a scar across his cheek. The other was tall and lanky, with dead eyes that made Lillian's skin crawl. Caleb stood his ground in the yard, thumbs hooked in his belt, looking relaxed but ready. Can I help you, gentlemen? Edward dismounted with the awkward stiffness of a man unused to horses. I'm looking for my niece, Lillian Hart. I was told she might be here. Who told you that? A shopkeeper in town. Said a woman matching her description had been seen at this ranch. Edward looked around with barely concealed disdain at the simple cabin, the modest corral, the mountains rising up behind. This is hardly a suitable place for a lady of breeding. Funny, I think it's perfect. Caleb's voice was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. But I'm afraid you've been misinformed. There's no Lillian Hart here. Don't lie to me, boy. I know she's here. I can feel it. Edward took a step forward, his face flushing red. That girl is mentally unstable. She ran away from a sanitarium where she was receiving treatment. Her family is desperate to get her back before she hurts herself or someone else. That's interesting, Caleb said conversationally, because the woman I know isn't unstable at all. In fact, she's one of the sanest people I've ever met. Edward's eyes narrowed. So you admit she's here? I said I knew a woman, didn't say she was here now. Stop playing games. Edward's composure cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath. I have legal guardianship over that girl. She's my property until she marries, and I will not have her throwing away her future on some dirt farmer in the middle of nowhere. Caleb's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped lower, more dangerous. First of all, I'm a rancher, not a farmer. Second, no human being is property. And third, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket. You're about 3 hours too late with your legal claim. He held out the marriage certificate. Edward snatched it, his face going from red to purple as he read. This is a forgery. It has to be. It's not. Signed by Pastor Williams, witnessed by Sheriff Colton and his wife. Filed proper with the county clerk. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Lillian Hart became Lillian Donovan, which means, legally, she's my responsibility now, not yours. You had no right! Edward's voice rose to a shout. She's a child. She doesn't know her own mind. I'll have this marriage annulled. You'll do nothing. The words came from the cabin doorway. Lillian stepped out onto the porch, her hands clenched at her sides, but her voice steady. Because I'm not a child, Uncle Edward. I'm 23 years old, and I made this choice freely. Edward's face twisted with fury when he saw her. Lillian, get your things. You're coming home right now. This is my home. This? He gestured dismissively at the cabin. This hovel. After everything I did for you, after I took you in when your parents died, fed you, clothed you, introduced you to the finest society Boston has to offer, this is how you repay me? By running away and marrying some nobody? You beat me, Lillian said, her voice shaking but clear. You tried to force me to marry a man I didn't love. You told me I was worthless, that my only value was in the connection I could bring you through marriage. You never once asked what I wanted. Because you're a woman. Your wants don't matter. Your duty should... My duty is to myself now, to my husband, not to you, not anymore. Edward's hand moved to his pocket, and Caleb tensed, but what he pulled out wasn't a weapon, it was money, a thick roll of bills that he thrust toward Caleb. Name your price. How much to walk away from this farce of a marriage? 500? 1,000? Caleb didn't even look at the money. There isn't enough money in the world. Everyone has a price. Mine is higher than you can pay. Edward's two hired men shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward their guns. The tall one spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. Want us to handle this, Mr. Hart? Yes, Edward said coldly. Get my niece. If this fool tries to stop you, do what you have to do. The two men started forward, and Caleb's hand moved to his own gun with a speed that surprised them. He didn't draw it, just rested his hand on the grip, a clear warning. I wouldn't. You gonna shoot us, farmer? The scarred one sneered. There's 2 of us and 1 of you. 3 of us, said a new voice. Sheriff Avery Colton rode into the yard, his rifle across his saddle, his deputy beside him. And I'd like to see you explain to a judge why you were threatening a legal marriage on a man's own property. Edward spun to face him. Sheriff, this man has kidnapped my niece. I demand you arrest him immediately. Can't arrest a man for marrying his wife, Mr. Hart, and I saw that marriage certificate myself. It's legal and binding. Then I'll have it annulled. I'll find a judge who... You can try, Avery said calmly. But it'll take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, Mrs. Donovan, he emphasized the name, is under her husband's protection, not yours. So I suggest you and your associates get back on those horses and leave, peacefully. Edward looked from the sheriff to Caleb to Lillian, and for a moment pure hatred blazed in his eyes. Then he drew himself up, trying to salvage some dignity. This isn't over, Lillian. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. And when you do, don't expect me to welcome you with open arms. I won't come back, Lillian said quietly. I'd rather die than go back to that house. That can be arranged, Edward said so softly that only Lillian heard him, then louder. You've made your choice. Live with it. He turned to Caleb. And you, Mr. Donovan, I hope you realize what you've taken on. That girl is damaged goods, broken. She'll bring you nothing but trouble. Caleb stepped forward until he was inches from Edward's face. When he spoke, his voice was low and deadly serious. The only damage she has is what you did to her, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows she's worth more than you ever told her. Now get off my land before I forget I'm a gentleman. For a moment it looked like Edward might try something foolish. His hand twitched toward his pocket again, and his hired men tensed. But Avery cocked his rifle with a loud click that echoed in the yard, and the moment passed. Let's go, Edward snapped to his men. They mounted up, though the scarred one kept his hand on his gun until they were well clear of the yard. Edward turned back one last time, his face a mask of cold fury. You haven't won, Lillian. You think this backwater sheriff can protect you forever? Think again. I have friends. I have resources. And I always collect what's mine. She was never yours, Caleb said. Now ride out while you still can. They left in a thunder of hooves, and the dust of their departure hung in the air like a promise of violence to come. Lillian stood frozen on the porch, her entire body shaking. Caleb was at her side in an instant, his arm around her shoulders. It's all right. He's gone. You're safe. Am I? She looked up at him with terrified eyes. You heard him, Caleb. He's not going to stop. He'll find a way to... Let him try. Caleb pulled her closer. He can throw all the money and lawyers and threats he wants at us. It won't change anything. You're my wife now, and I protect what's mine. Avery joined them on the porch, his expression grim. He's right to be worried. That man won't give up easily, and he's got the kind of money that can buy a lot of trouble. What are our options? Caleb asked. Legally, you're solid. The marriage is valid, properly recorded. He can contest it, but it'll be an uphill battle, and it'll take time. The real danger is if he decides to take matters into his own hands. You think he'd try something illegal? I think he's a man used to getting what he wants, and right now he wants his niece back. Men like that don't take no for an answer. Avery looked at Lillian. Those men he had with him, they're hired guns. I recognize the tall one. Name's Jack Merrick. He's got a reputation as a killer who doesn't ask questions as long as the money's good. Lillian felt ice slide down her spine. He'd actually kill Caleb? Just to get to me? He'd justify it somehow. Make it look like an accident or self-defense. And in the meantime, you'd be alone and vulnerable again. Avery took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. I can't give you round-the-clock protection. I've got a whole county to cover with just me and one deputy. You're going to have to be careful. We will be, Caleb promised. I'll keep my eyes open, vary my routine, make sure Lillian's never alone. We'll make it through this. After Avery left, Caleb and Lillian went inside the cabin. The morning's joy had been replaced by tension and fear, but also something else, a sense of being united against a common enemy. They were truly married now, not just on paper, but in the way that mattered. They'd stood together against her uncle. They'd chosen each other in front of witnesses and threats and consequences. Lillian sank into a chair at the table, her legs finally giving out. I've ruined your life. You've improved it considerably. Caleb sat across from her and took her hands. Lillian, listen to me. I went into this with my eyes open. I knew there might be trouble. I didn't care then, and I don't care now. But if something happens to you because of me, then it happens. But I'd rather die standing up for something that matters than live another 8 years alone in this cabin, pretending I don't need anyone. He squeezed her hands. You've reminded me what it feels like to be alive, to have a reason to wake up in the morning besides just more work. That's worth fighting for. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't deserve you. You deserve so much more than me. But I'm what you've got, and I promise I'll do my best to be worthy of you. She pulled one hand free and cupped his cheek, feeling the stubble there, the warmth of his skin. I was so scared when I stepped off that stagecoach. I thought my life was over, but you looked at me, really looked at me, past the bruises and the fear, and you saw me, the real me. No one's ever done that before. I see you, he said softly. I see a woman who's braver than she knows, stronger than anyone who's tried to break her, and I see my wife. This time when they kissed, it wasn't gentle and careful like at the church. It was deeper, more urgent, filled with all the fear and relief and desperate hope of the past few hours. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. I should make lunch, Lillian said, not moving. Probably, Caleb agreed, also not moving. They sat there for a long moment, hands still clasped, foreheads nearly touching. Then Lillian smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time that day. So, what do husbands and wives do on their wedding day? Well, traditionally there's a party, dancing, food, celebration. We had none of that. No, we didn't. Caleb stood and pulled her to her feet. But we've got the rest of the day, and I've got a bottle of wine I've been saving for a special occasion. Seems like getting married qualifies. They spent the afternoon together, deliberately putting aside the fear and focusing on what was good. Caleb opened the wine and they shared it on the porch, watching the horses graze in the pasture. Lillian told him stories from her childhood, from before her parents died and life became a cage. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to breed the finest horses in Montana. We could do that together, she said, warming to the idea. I could help with the training. We could make a name for ourselves. Donovan Horses, he mused, has a nice ring to it. Or Donovan Ranch, more professional. Look at us, planning a future. He took her hand again, still marveling at how natural it felt. This morning I wasn't sure we'd make it through the day. We did, though. We made it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Caleb started a fire, and Lillian made dinner. They ate together, talking and laughing, and for a few hours they were just newlyweds enjoying their first day of marriage. The threats and danger faded to background noise against the simple pleasure of being together. But as night fell, reality crept back in. Caleb checked the windows, made sure the doors were locked, and positioned his rifle where he could reach it quickly. Lillian watched him with growing anxiety. Do you think he'll come back tonight? I don't know, but I'm not taking chances. They stood awkwardly in the main room, suddenly aware of the elephant neither had addressed. They were married. They'd shared a bed at the church's insistence. It would look suspicious if they didn't, but neither knew quite how to navigate this new reality. I can sleep out here, Caleb offered. Give you privacy. No, Lillian squared her shoulders. We're married, really married, and if Uncle Edward sends someone to check on us, it needs to look legitimate. We should... She took a breath. We should share a room. Lillian, I don't expect... I know you don't. That's why I trust you. She looked at him steadily. I'm not ready for everything that marriage usually entails, but I'm not afraid of you, and I don't want to sleep alone tonight, not after seeing him again. So they went to his room, their room now. Caleb changed in the corner with his back turned while Lillian put on her nightgown behind a screen he'd rigged up. When they both climbed into the bed, there was a careful space between them, a no-man's land of propriety and uncertainty. But then Lillian spoke into the darkness. Caleb, could you hold me? Just for a little while? He pulled her close without hesitation, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. She fit perfectly there, like she'd been made to tuck into that exact space. He felt her relax by degrees, the fear slowly leaving her body. Thank you, she whispered. For everything, for today, for standing up to him, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for trusting me. I know that's not easy after everything you've been through. It should be harder, she admitted. But somehow with you, it's not. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds through the open window. Then Lillian spoke again, her voice drowsy. Caleb, I think I could fall in love with you. Is that strange to say? His heart did something complicated in his chest. Not strange at all. I think I could fall in love with you too. Maybe already am. Good, she murmured, already half asleep. That's good. Within minutes, her breathing evened out, and she was asleep in his arms. Caleb lay awake longer, his mind churning. They'd made it through the first real test. Edward had come, and they'd stood firm, but this wasn't over. The old man had made that clear. There would be more attempts, more pressure, maybe even violence. But as he held his sleeping wife, feeling her warmth and trust, Caleb knew he'd do it all again without hesitation. She was his now, and he was hers, bound together by choice and need and something that was growing stronger every day. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and tension. Caleb and Lillian fell into their routines, morning chores, afternoon work with the horses, evening meals together. But there was always an undercurrent of awareness, a constant vigilance. Caleb kept his rifle close. Lillian checked the horizon constantly for approaching riders. They grew closer during this time, the shared danger creating a bond that might have taken months to form under normal circumstances. Caleb learned that Lillian sang when she thought no one was listening, soft melodies from her childhood. Lillian discovered that Caleb talked to the horses like they were people and could coax even the most stubborn animal to trust him. They were still careful with each other physically. He didn't push, she didn't retreat. They shared a bed but kept that respectful distance, though each night that distance seemed to shrink a little. Sometimes Caleb would wake to find her pressed against him, seeking comfort and sleep that she wouldn't yet ask for while awake. He'd hold her and feel grateful that she felt safe enough to let her guard down. On the fourth day after the confrontation, a letter arrived. Avery brought it personally, his face grim. "This came for you yesterday," he said, handing it to Caleb. "Thought I should deliver it myself." The envelope was expensive paper, sealed with red wax. Caleb opened it carefully while Lillian looked over his shoulder. The handwriting was precise and cold. "Mr. Donovan, I am Horace Blackwood, the gentleman Lillian was promised to before she abandoned her responsibilities and fled west. I wish to make you a business proposition. I am prepared to offer you $5,000 in gold for an annulment of your marriage. This is more money than you could earn in 10 years of ranching. In addition, I will forget any insult to my honor and refrain from pursuing legal action against you for alienation of affection. This is a generous offer made in good faith. If you accept, send word to the Buckeye Hotel in Silver Butte where I am staying. If I do not hear from you within 3 days, I will assume your answer is no and act accordingly. Choose wisely. The consequences of refusing may be severe. Sincerely, H. Blackwood. Lillian went white. He's here in Silver Butte, both of them. Looks that way. Caleb's jaw was tight. $5,000. That's a lot of money. Something flickered in Lillian's eyes. Hurt, fear, the old belief that everyone had a price. It is. Enough to expand the ranch, buy more horses. Enough to... I'm not interested. Caleb crumpled the letter and threw it in the fire. There's not enough gold in California to make me give you up. The relief on her face was palpable. I shouldn't have doubted you. You've had 11 years of people disappointing you. It's going to take more than a few weeks to undo that. He pulled her close. But I've got time. We've got time. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the letter, about the phrase, act accordingly. It wasn't hard to interpret that threat. He rose quietly, not wanting to wake Lillian, and went to check the property. Everything seemed normal. The horses were calm in the corral. The night was quiet except for cricket song and the distant call of an owl. But when he approached the barn, something felt wrong. The door was slightly ajar, and he knew he'd closed it securely before bed. Caleb drew his gun and approached slowly, every sense on high alert. Inside the barn, someone had been through his tools, his tack, his supplies. Nothing seemed stolen, but everything was slightly disarranged. And on the wall, painted in black letters that dripped like blood, were 3 words that made his stomach clench. She's not yours. Caleb heard the footsteps behind him a second too late. He spun, bringing his gun up, but the heavy object, a shovel, he realized later, caught him on the side of the head. Pain exploded through his skull, and he went down hard, tasting blood. Through dimming vision, he saw 2 figures standing over him. The scarred man and Jack Merrick, the killer Avery had warned him about. Merrick crouched down, his dead eyes examining Caleb like he was an interesting insect. Nothing personal, Merrick said in his gravel voice. But Mr. Hart pays well, and you're in his way. We're going to make this look like an accident. You fell, hit your head, tragic. And that pretty wife of yours will be alone and vulnerable again. See how that works? Caleb tried to move, tried to speak, but his body wouldn't cooperate. The world was spinning, darkness creeping in at the edges. What was that? The scarred man said. Thought I heard something. Just the horses. Come on, let's finish this. Merrick raised the shovel again, preparing to deliver the final blow. Caleb tried to roll away, but his limbs felt like lead. This was it. He was going to die in his own barn and leave Lillian defenseless. Then a shotgun blast split the night. Both men froze. Caleb managed to turn his head and saw her, Lillian standing in the barn doorway in her nightgown, his shotgun at her shoulder, her face set in lines of absolute determination. Step away from my husband, she said, her voice steady despite the weapon's kick. That was a warning shot. The next one won't be. Merrick's hand went to his gun. You don't have the nerve, little girl. Try me. Lillian pumped another shell into the chamber. I've got 6 more shots and I only need 2. 1 for each of you. And at this distance, even I can't miss. The sound of running footsteps made everyone turn. Avery burst into the barn, his own gun drawn, his deputy right behind him. Everyone freeze! Merrick and the scarred man looked at each other, calculating odds. Then slowly, reluctantly, they raised their hands. Smart choice, Avery said. Now on your knees, both of you. As the deputy secured the 2 men, Avery moved to check on Caleb. How bad? I'll live, Caleb managed, though his head felt like it was splitting open. Thanks to my wife. Lillian was suddenly at his side, the shotgun abandoned, her hands gentle as she examined his injury. You're bleeding. We need to get you to the doctor. I'm fine. You're not fine. You took a shovel to the head. There were tears in her eyes now, her composure cracking. I heard them from the house. I grabbed the shotgun and ran. If I'd been 1 minute later, but you weren't. He reached up to cup her face, ignoring the way the movement made his head spin. You saved my life. Avery cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but we need to talk about what happened here. Over the next hour, Caleb and Lillian told their story to Avery, while the doctor, roused from bed and none too happy about it, stitched the gash on Caleb's head. Merrick and the scarred man were taken to the town jail, protesting their innocence the whole way. "They'll lawyer up," Avery predicted. "Claim they were just checking on the property, that you attacked them first. It'll be your word against theirs." "But they painted that message on the wall," Lillian protested, "which they'll say was already there, or that you painted it yourself to frame them." Avery sighed. "I believe you, don't get me wrong, but proving it in court is another matter. These men know how to game the system." "What about Hart and Blackwood?" Caleb asked. "They're the ones who sent them." "Almost certainly, but unless one of those men testifies against them, we can't prove that either. Men like Hart don't get their hands dirty directly." Avery looked at them seriously. "Here's what's going to happen. Those two will be held for a few days while we investigate. Hart and Blackwood will hire expensive lawyers. Eventually, they'll either be released or get minimal sentences. And they'll try again, smarter next time." "So what do we do?" Lillian asked. "You keep your guard up, you watch each other's backs, and you consider whether staying here is worth the risk." Avery held up a hand as Caleb started to protest. "I'm not saying run. I'm saying think about it. This is your home, but it's not worth dying for." After everyone left, Caleb and Lillian sat together in the cabin as dawn began to break. The doctor had given Caleb laudanum for the pain, but he'd refused it, not wanting his judgment clouded. His head throbbed mercilessly, but he was alive. They both were. "We should talk about what Avery said," Lillian began. "There's nothing to talk about. This is our home. I'm not running." "Caleb, they almost killed you tonight." "But they didn't. Thanks to you." He took her hand. "You were amazing, you know that? Most people would have frozen. You grabbed a shotgun and faced down two killers." "I was terrified." "But you did it anyway. That's what courage is." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "I couldn't let them hurt you. The thought of losing you, of being alone again, I couldn't bear it. Somewhere in the last few weeks, you've become essential to me." "You're essential to me too." He turned to face her fully, ignoring the way the movement made his head swim. "Lillian, I know we got married for practical reasons. I know it was supposed to be about protection and legal rights. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real for me." "It's real for me too," she whispered. "I tried not to let it happen. I tried to keep my distance, protect my heart, but you're impossible not to care about." They kissed then, softly at first and then deeper, all the fear and relief and growing love pouring into that connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I'm not giving this up," Caleb said fiercely. "I'm not giving you up. Not to your uncle, not to Blackwood, not to anyone. We fight for this. For us. Together," Lillian agreed. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As the sun rose over the Montana mountains, painting their world in shades of gold and hope, they held each other and made silent promises. This was their home, their life, their chance at something beautiful after so much darkness. And they would fight for it with everything they had. The war with Edward Hart and Horace Blackwood wasn't over. In fact, it had barely begun. But Caleb and Lillian Donovan were no longer just two people bound by convenience. They were partners, allies, and if given time, they might just become the one thing that terrified Edward most, a happily married couple who couldn't be broken or bought. The days following the attack fell into a new pattern defined by constant vigilance and growing closeness. Caleb's head wound healed slowly, leaving a scar that Lillian traced gently with her fingers when she thought he was sleeping. They no longer maintained any pretense of distance. Each night they held each other close, drawing comfort and strength from the simple fact of being together. Sheriff Avery visited 3 days after the barn incident with news that surprised no one. Merrick and his partner made bail. Hart and Blackwood provided the money, though they claimed they'd never met either man before. The judge had no choice but to release them pending trial. "Which means they're free to try again," Caleb said flatly. His head still ached, but his vision had cleared and his strength was returning. "I've got no legal grounds to hold them or run Hart out of town. He's a wealthy man with no criminal record who claims he's just trying to help his disturbed niece. On paper, it all looks legitimate. Avery's frustration was evident, but I can keep an eye on them, and I've let it be known around town that any harm that comes to you two will be investigated thoroughly." After Avery left, Lillian paced the cabin like a caged animal. This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, if I just accepted what Uncle Edward wanted, then you'd be married to a man you didn't love, living a life that would slowly kill your spirit. Caleb caught her hand and pulled her to a stop. You made the right choice. The brave choice. Don't second-guess it now. But you're in danger because of me. I was in danger of dying alone and empty before you came. I'll take this kind of danger any day. She looked at him with those hazel eyes that had learned to trust again, and something shifted in her expression. Caleb Donovan, I think I've fallen in love with you. The words hung between them, precious and fragile. Caleb felt his heart expand in his chest. I know I've fallen in love with you. Probably happened the moment you pointed that shotgun at two killers in your nightgown. Lillian laughed, the sound breaking the tension. That's what did it? Not my cooking or my way with horses? Those helped, but seeing you fierce and unbreakable, that's when I knew for certain. He pulled her close. I love you, Lillian Donovan. Not because we had to get married, not because of the circumstances, but because of who you are. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. I didn't think I could. I thought Uncle Edward and Horace Blackwood had broken something in me, but you put it back together. That night, their marriage became real in every sense. There was tenderness and care, an awareness of all Lillian had suffered and overcome. Caleb was patient, letting her set the pace, and when tears came, they were tears of healing rather than pain. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, and Lillian felt something she'd thought lost forever, hope for the future. We're going to be all right, she said, tracing patterns on his chest. Somehow, we're going to make it through this. We are, he agreed, because neither of us knows how to quit. But the universe seemed determined to test that resolve. 2 weeks passed in relative peace, long enough for them to relax slightly, to begin believing they might have won. Then Lillian woke one morning feeling strange, dizzy and nauseous in a way she'd never experienced before. Must be something I ate, she told Caleb as she rushed outside to be sick in the bushes. Want me to get the doctor? No, I'm fine. Really, it's probably just... She stopped mid-sentence as realization crashed over her. She counted back in her head, thinking about her monthly courses, about how they'd been sharing a bed for nearly 3 weeks now. Oh? Oh? Caleb looked confused. Oh, what? I think... She pressed her hand to her still flat stomach. Caleb, I think I might be with child. The color drained from his face and then flooded back. Are you sure? No, but the signs are there. I've missed my courses and now this sickness. She looked up at him, trying to gauge his reaction. How do you feel about that? He was quiet for a long moment, his hand coming to rest over hers on her stomach. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I feel like the luckiest man in Montana. Terrified, but lucky. Terrified? I lost a child once, Lillian. Lost both wife and baby. The thought of going through that again. He couldn't finish the sentence. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm not Sarah, and this baby isn't that baby. What happened before doesn't have to happen again. But what if it does? Then we'll face it together. But Caleb, we can't live our lives afraid of what might happen. We have to hope for what we want to happen. She smiled despite her own fears. I want this baby, your baby, our baby. Tell me you want it too. I do, he said fervently. God help me, I do. I want everything with you. A family, a future, all of it. They held each other in the morning sun, two people who'd found unexpected love building something new from the ruins of their pasts. But even in that moment of joy, both knew the pregnancy changed everything. A baby made them more vulnerable, gave Edward Hart more leverage, more urgency to his campaign. Lillian's suspicions were confirmed 2 weeks later by the doctor, a kindly older man named Samuel Price who'd delivered half the babies in the county. You're definitely pregnant, Mrs. Donovan. I'd say about 6 weeks along. Baby should arrive sometime in early spring. Early spring, Lillian repeated, her hand on her stomach. Already she could feel the difference, a subtle awareness of the life growing inside her. You'll need to take it easy, Dr. Price advised. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest, and I'll want to see you monthly to make sure everything's progressing well. After he left, Caleb was like a man possessed. He immediately tried to ban Lillian from all ranch work, which led to their first real argument as a married couple. I'm pregnant, not dying, she protested as he attempted to take the egg basket from her hands. Women have been working while pregnant since the beginning of time. But you don't have to. I can handle everything. Caleb Donovan, if you try to wrap me in cotton wool for the next 7 months, I will lose my mind. I need to be useful. I need to contribute. You're carrying our child. That's contribution enough. It's not the same, and you know it. She set down the basket and took his hands. I understand you're scared. I'm scared too. But you have to let me live my life. Trust me to know my own limits. It took some negotiating, but they reached a compromise. Lillian would continue her normal activities, but promised to rest when tired and avoid anything strenuous. Caleb would try not to hover too obviously, though he failed at this more often than not. But it was endearing rather than annoying, this fierce protectiveness born of love and loss. The news spread through Silver Butte faster than wildfire. Within days, everyone knew that the Donovans were expecting. Women who'd barely spoken to Lillian before suddenly appeared with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Martha Colton brought over a cradle her own children had used. Even gruff old Pete Harrison offered congratulations, though he couched it in his typical pessimism about the hardships of raising children on the frontier. But not everyone was happy about the news. Word reached Edward Hart and Horace Blackwood at the Buckeye Hotel, where they'd been staying for nearly a month, plotting their next move. When Blackwood heard, he smashed a whiskey glass against the wall in rage. She's pregnant? With that farmer's child? His voice was ice and venom. This ruins everything. Even if we get the marriage annulled now, she's damaged goods. No respectable man would want her. Edward Hart sat in his chair like a bloated spider, his cold eyes calculating. Unless we remove the child from the equation. Blackwood stopped pacing. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that pregnant women sometimes have accidents, falls, injuries that result in unfortunate losses. Edward's smile was cruel. And once she's lost the baby and realized that frontier life is too dangerous for a woman of her breeding, she might be more amenable to coming home. You'd risk killing her? If necessary, but I'm betting we won't have to. We just need to make her see that staying here puts not only herself at risk, but any children she might have. Fear is a powerful motivator. They began planning, but this time they were more careful. No hired thugs who could testify against them. No direct action that could be traced back to them. Instead, they would use proxies and accidents, each one deniable, each one designed to terrify Lillian into submission. It started small. The Donovans' vegetable garden was trampled one night, every plant destroyed. The fence to the horse corral was cut, sending their animals scattering across the valley. It took Caleb and Lillian 2 days to round them all up, and one of the younger horses had injured his leg badly enough that Dr. Price had to put him down. This is harassment, Avery said when he came to investigate. But I can't prove who's doing it, and technically, these are just property crimes, misdemeanors at best. They're trying to wear us down, Caleb said grimly, make us feel unsafe. It's working, Lillian admitted. She was exhausted from the stress and the pregnancy, dark circles under her eyes. Every noise at night makes me jump. Every time Caleb leaves the property, I'm terrified he won't come back. The escalation came 2 weeks later. Caleb was in town buying supplies when a fire broke out in the barn. Lillian was alone at the house and smelled smoke before she saw flames. She ran to the barn and saw it engulfed, heard the terrified screams of the 3 horses still inside. She didn't think. She grabbed a bucket, soaked a blanket in the water trough, wrapped it around herself, and ran into the burning building. The smoke was choking, the heat overwhelming, but she could see the horses in their stalls, wild with panic. She threw open the first stall, and the horse bolted past her toward freedom, then the second. But the 3rd horse, a young mare named Iris that Lillian had been training, was too frightened to move. Come on, girl, Lillian coughed, her eyes streaming. You have to move, please! She grabbed Iris's halter and pulled, but the horse reared back. The ceiling above them creaked ominously, and burning debris began to fall. Lillian knew she should run, knew staying could kill her and her unborn child, but she couldn't leave Iris to burn. Please, she begged, tears mixing with smoke on her face. "Please, Iris. Trust me." Something in her voice must have reached the mare. Iris took a tentative step forward, then another. Lillian backed toward the door, maintaining eye contact, talking softly, even as flames ate through the barn's structure. They were nearly out when a beam collapsed behind them, missing Iris by inches. The mare bolted in terror, nearly trampling Lillian in her panic to escape. Lillian stumbled out of the barn just as the roof caved in with a roar of flame and destruction. She collapsed on the ground, coughing and gasping, her nightgown singed and her face black with soot. Her hands instinctively went to her stomach, praying the baby was unharmed. That's how Caleb found her when he came racing up the road, having seen the smoke from a mile away. He leaped from the wagon before it fully stopped and was at her side in an instant. "Lillian! God, Lillian, are you hurt?" "The horses," she managed between coughs. "I got them out, all three. Damn the horses!" He pulled her into his arms, his whole body shaking. "You could have died. The baby. The baby's fine. I'm fine." But even as she said it, she felt a sharp cramp low in her abdomen. Fear flooded through her. "Caleb, I need Dr. Price. Now!" The next hours were a blur of pain and terror. Dr. Price examined her while Caleb paced outside and finally emerged with a grave expression. "The baby's still there," he said. "Heartbeat's strong, but Mrs. Donovan's body has been through significant trauma. She needs complete bed rest for the next 2 weeks. No getting up except to use the necessary. No stress, no exertion. If she's lucky, the pregnancy will hold. And if she's not lucky," Caleb's voice was barely audible, "then we'll deal with that if it happens. But right now, rest is the best medicine." Lillian was confined to bed while Caleb dealt with the aftermath of the fire. The barn was a total loss. Avery investigated and found evidence that the fire had been deliberately set, rags soaked in kerosene, hidden where they'd smolder before igniting. But there were no witnesses, no proof of who'd done it. "Hart and Blackwood were having dinner at the hotel when the fire started," Avery reported. "Half the town saw them. They've got perfect alibis." "Of course they do," Caleb said bitterly. "They paid someone else to do their dirty work." "I know it, you know it, but I can't arrest them on suspicion. I need evidence." Avery's frustration was evident. "Caleb, I'm doing everything I can, but these men are slippery. They know how to work the system." That night, Caleb sat beside Lillian's bed, holding her hand while she slept fitfully. He thought about everything that had happened, about the escalating attacks, about how close he'd come to losing both his wife and his child. And he realized that Avery was right. They couldn't win this way. Hart and Blackwood had money and lawyers and the willingness to play dirty. They could keep this up indefinitely, chipping away at the Donovans' peace and safety until something broke. But Caleb had something they didn't. He had the support of a community that had grown to love Lillian, that had seen her courage and kindness. He had friends who believed in him, and he had an idea that might just turn the tables. The next morning, he called a meeting at the church. Every rancher, shopkeeper, and family in Silver Butte showed up, curious about what Caleb Donovan needed so urgently. He stood before them, hat in hand, and told them everything. The whole story of Lillian's escape, the forced marriage proposal, the beatings, Edward Hart's campaign of terror. "I know some of you have wondered why a Boston lady would marry a rancher like me," he said. "Wondered what secrets we were hiding. Well, here's the truth. My wife came west to escape a man who beat her and tried to sell her to the highest bidder. And now that man is in Silver Butte trying to destroy everything we've built, trying to terrorize her into going back to him. Yesterday, someone set fire to my barn while Lillian was alone. She could have died saving our horses. Our unborn baby could have died." There was a murmur of shock and anger through the crowd. Martha Colton stood up, her face flushed. "That's outrageous. Why hasn't the sheriff arrested these men?" "Because they're careful," Caleb explained. "They never do the dirty work themselves. They hire people and make sure they have alibis. Legally, there's nothing Avery can do." "Then what can we do?" asked Frank Thornton. "We can make them feel as unwelcome in Silver Butte as they've made my wife feel unsafe on her own property. We can refuse to serve them in our shops. We can make it clear that their money isn't wanted here. We can show them that this community protects its own." Caleb looked around at all the faces he'd known for 8 years. people who'd become more than neighbors. I'm not asking anyone to break the law, but I'm asking you to stand with us, to show Hart and Blackwood that they're not welcome here." There was a moment of silence. Then Pastor Williams stood. "I'll support you, Caleb. Any man who beats a woman and terrorizes a young couple deserves to be shunned." "I'm in too," Martha declared. "I'll not serve them at the hotel another day." One by one, people stood and pledged their support. The shopkeepers agreed to refuse Hart and Blackwood's business. The saloon owner said they could find somewhere else to drink. Even old Pete Harrison, who'd never shown much interest in anyone's problems but his own, stood and said he'd keep an eye out for any more hired thugs coming through town. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all. This means more than you know." Word of the town's decision spread quickly. Within hours, Edward Hart and Horace Blackwood found themselves persona non grata in Silver Butte. The hotel refused to extend their stay. The restaurants wouldn't serve them. The livery wouldn't stable their horses. Everywhere they turned, they met cold stares and closed doors. Edward Hart was furious. "This is discrimination. I'll sue this entire town." "Sue us then," Martha Colton said cheerfully, "but you'll do it from somewhere else. Your room is needed for actual guests." Blackwood tried a different approach, confronting Caleb in the street outside the general store. "This changes nothing, you know. Lillian is legally my wife and the mother of my child," Caleb interrupted, "and you need to accept that and move on with your life. She was promised to me. She's a human being, not property, and she chose me." Caleb stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Now I'm going to give you one chance. One. Leave Silver Butte. Leave Montana. Go back to Boston and forget my wife exists. Because if anything else happens to her, if she loses this baby because of your harassment, I won't wait for the law to handle you. I'll handle you myself. Do you understand?" Blackwood tried to hold his ground, but something in Caleb's eyes made him step back. "You're threatening me. I'm promising you there's a difference." Blackwood left, but Edward Hart proved more stubborn. He stayed in Silver Butte for another week, renting a room in a farmhouse outside town when the hotel refused him. He made increasingly desperate attempts to see Lillian, to talk sense into her, as he put it, but Caleb turned him away every time. Finally, Sheriff Avery paid Edward a visit with an ultimatum. "I can't force you to leave, but I can tell you that if anything else happens to the Donovans, if their property is damaged, if either of them is harmed, if they so much as stub a toe, I'm going to investigate you so thoroughly that every illegal thing you've ever done will come to light, and I'm betting a man like you has plenty to hide." Edward's face purpled. "You have no right. I have every right. This is my town, and I protect the people in it. You've made enemies here, Mr. Hart, powerful ones, people who would be very interested to know about your business dealings, your gambling debts, the way you treated your niece. I've already sent letters to some colleagues in Boston. Amazing what they've dug up." This was a bluff. Avery had sent letters but hadn't received responses yet, but Edward didn't know that. He paled slightly, calculation replacing anger in his cold eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that sometimes the price of revenge is higher than anyone wants to pay. Your niece is married, pregnant, and happy. She's never coming back to you. Accept it and move on before you lose more than just her." That night, Edward Hart and Horace Blackwood left Silver Butte. They didn't say goodbye, didn't make threats or promises. They simply packed their belongings, settled their few remaining debts, and rode out before dawn. When Avery brought the news to the Donovan ranch, Lillian was still on bed rest but looking stronger each day. "Are they really gone?" she asked, barely daring to hope. "They're really gone. I had the station master in the next town confirm they bought tickets back east." Lillian burst into tears, relief and joy and exhaustion all mixed together. Caleb held her carefully, mindful of the baby, and felt his own eyes burning. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's really over." But it wasn't quite over. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Lillian recognized the handwriting and almost threw it in the fire unopened, but Caleb convinced her to read it. It was from Edward Hart. "Lillian, you have made your choice, and I have made mine. I wash my hands of you. From this day forward, you are no niece of mine. You will inherit nothing from me. Your name will be struck from the family Bible. When people ask about you, I will say you died. In a way, the Lillian I knew has died, replaced by the stranger who values dust and horses over civilization and family. I hope your frontier life brings you happiness, though I doubt it will. You've thrown away everything for a man who can give you nothing but hard work and harder winters, but perhaps that's what you deserve. Do not contact me again. We are finished. Edward Hart. Lillian read it twice, then carefully folded it and set it aside. Caleb watched her anxiously. Are you all right? I am, she said, and realized it was true. He's given me exactly what I wanted, freedom. He's cut me loose, which means he has no claim on me anymore. I'm not his niece. I'm not his property. I'm just Lillian Donovan, wife of a Montana rancher and mother-to-be of his child. And I couldn't be happier. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, where the baby was just beginning to show. This is my family now. You and this little one. This is where I belong. Caleb kissed her softly, tasting salt from her tears. We're going to have a good life, Lillian. I promise you that. I know we will. We already do. The rest of the summer passed in peace. Lillian recovered fully from the fire incident, and the baby continued to grow strong and healthy. Caleb rebuilt the barn with help from neighbors, and it rose from the ashes bigger and better than before. The garden was replanted, the horses thrived, and slowly, day by day, the fear and tension that had defined their early marriage gave way to joy and contentment. They fell in love more deeply with each passing week, discovering new things about each other. Caleb learned that Lillian sang lullabies to her growing belly when she thought no one was listening. Lillian discovered that Caleb sometimes talked to the baby too, telling it about the ranch and the horses, and promising to teach it to ride as soon as it could walk. As summer faded into fall and the mountains blazed with color, Lillian stood on the porch one evening watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire and gold. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his hands on her now prominent belly. What are you thinking about? He asked. About how far we've come. 3 months ago, I stepped off a stagecoach, terrified and broken. And now look at us. We're building something beautiful here. We are, he agreed, and it's only going to get better. The baby kicked, strong enough that Caleb felt it through Lillian's dress. They both laughed, sharing the wonder of that tiny life making its presence known. In that moment, with the sun setting over their land and their child moving beneath their hands, they were complete. They'd fought for this peace, this love, this chance at happiness. And they'd won. Winter came to Montana like a promise kept, blanketing the valley in snow that turned the world quiet and clean. The rebuilt barn stood strong against the wind, the horses sheltered and warm inside. The cabin that had once housed only Caleb's loneliness now glowed with lamplight and love, smoke curling from the chimney into the crystalline air. Lillian grew rounder as the months passed, her body changing in ways both miraculous and uncomfortable. By December, she could no longer see her own feet, and simple tasks like putting on boots became elaborate productions that left her frustrated and laughing at herself. Caleb treated her like spun glass, which both touched and irritated her in equal measure. I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain, she reminded him for the 100th time as he tried to carry her over a patch of ice on the porch. Humor me, he said, not setting her down. I've already lost one wife and child. I'm not taking any chances with you. The shadow of his past still haunted him sometimes, especially as they drew closer to Lillian's due date. She'd wake in the night to find him watching her sleep, his hand resting protectively on her belly. During those moments, she'd pull him close and remind him that she was strong, that their baby was strong, that what happened before didn't have to happen again. Christmas came, their first as a married couple. They couldn't travel to town for services because the snow was too deep and Lillian too pregnant, so they celebrated alone in the cabin. Caleb had secretly carved a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and painting it with careful attention. When Lillian saw it on Christmas morning, she cried so hard he worried he'd done something wrong. These are happy tears, she assured him, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It's perfect. Everything is perfect. They made love that night with careful tenderness, Lillian's belly between them, the baby moving as if to remind them of the miracle they'd created. Afterwards, lying in the darkness with her head on Caleb's chest, Lillian spoke softly. I used to think love was something that happened to you, like catching a fever, something beyond your control that you either suffered through or enjoyed. But this, she placed his hand over her heart, this is a choice we make every day, to be kind, to be patient, to see each other clearly and love what we see. That's more powerful than any fever. When did you get so wise? Caleb asked, kissing her forehead. When I married a man who showed me what real love looks like. January brought bitter cold and shorter days. Lillian nested with increasing urgency, reorganizing the cabin until everything was exactly where she wanted it. She washed and folded tiny clothes that Martha Colton had given her, imagining the baby who would wear them. She made lists of names, debating each one with Caleb over dinner. If it's a girl, I like Grace, she said one evening. It means blessing, and that's what this baby is. Grace Donovan, Caleb tested the name. I like it. And if it's a boy? I was thinking James, after my father, but only if you approve. James Donovan it is. He reached across the table to take her hand. Boy or girl, this child is going to be so loved. More loved than any child in Montana, Lillian agreed, her eyes shining. But the easy joy of pregnancy gave way to anxiety as her due date approached. Dr. Price had estimated early March, which meant they were entering the most dangerous phase. Caleb arranged for Martha Colton to stay with them when the time came, since she'd assisted with dozens of births. He laid in extra supplies, made sure the cabin was warm and well-stocked, and tried not to let Lillian see how terrified he was. She saw anyway. She always did. Talk to me, she said one night in late February as they lay in bed. Outside, a storm howled against the windows. Tell me what you're afraid of. Everything, he admitted. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid of losing the baby. I'm afraid of being alone again. You won't be alone. Even if something happens to me, don't. His voice broke. Don't even say it. Caleb, listen to me. She struggled to sit up, and he helped her, arranging pillows behind her back. We can't control what happens, but we can choose not to let fear steal the joy we have right now. I'm healthy. The baby's healthy. Dr. Price says everything looks good. We have to trust that. I'm trying. I know you are, and I love you for it. She took his face in her hands. But I need you to believe with me. Believe that in a few weeks, we're going to be holding our baby. Believe that we're going to watch this child grow up, teach them to ride horses, tell them stories. Believe in our future together. He kissed her palms, her wrists, her lips. I believe, he whispered. I believe in you, in us, in all of it. The baby came on a Tuesday morning in early March, 3 days after a late winter storm had dumped 2 feet of snow across the valley. Lillian woke before dawn with a backache that grew steadily worse as the morning progressed. By breakfast, the pains were coming regularly enough that Caleb sent for Martha Colton and Dr. Price. It's too early, Lillian gasped between contractions. The baby's not supposed to come for another week. Babies come when they're ready, not when we schedule them, Martha said calmly, arriving within the hour on snowshoes. Dr. Price came an hour later, riding through drifts that nearly swallowed his horse. The labor was long and difficult. Lillian had heard other women talk about childbirth, but nothing prepared her for the reality, the overwhelming power of her body taking over, the pain that eclipsed everything else, the terrifying sense of being caught in something far bigger than herself. She clutched Caleb's hand so hard she left bruises, but he never complained, never left her side. You can do this, he murmured over and over. You're the strongest person I know. You faced down killers. You survived things that would have broken anyone else. You can do this. I can't, she sobbed during a particularly brutal contraction. Caleb, I can't. You can. You are. I'm right here with you. The hours blurred together. Morning became afternoon, became evening. Dr. Price's expression grew more concerned, though he tried to hide it. The baby was coming slowly, too slowly. Lillian was exhausted, her strength failing. We might need to consider other options, Dr. Price said quietly to Caleb during a brief lull. If the baby doesn't come soon, no. Lillian's voice was weak but determined. No cutting. I can do this. Give me 1 more hour. Lillian, 1 more hour, please. Dr. Price looked at Caleb, who nodded. 1 more hour. Lillian gathered every ounce of strength she had left. She thought about everything she'd survived to get to this moment, the beatings, the fear, the desperate flight west. She thought about Caleb and the life they'd built, the home they'd made. She thought about the tiny person fighting to be born, and she refused to give up. When the next contraction came, she bore down with everything she had, and again, until finally, as the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, a baby's cry split the air. "It's a girl," Dr. Price announced, holding up a tiny, perfect infant. A beautiful, healthy girl. Lillian collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Caleb was crying too, laughing and sobbing at the same time as Dr. Price placed the baby in Lillian's arms. She was small and red and angry at being born, her little fists waving, her mouth open in indignant protest. "Hello, Grace," Lillian whispered, touching one tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around hers instinctively, and Lillian felt her heart expand in a way she'd never experienced. "Hello, my darling girl. We've been waiting for you." Caleb knelt beside the bed, his hand covering both of theirs. "She's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe—" He couldn't finish, too overwhelmed to speak. Martha and Dr. Price cleaned up efficiently, giving the new family space. Martha wiped tears from her own eyes as she worked. "That's the most stubborn baby I've ever seen born," she said. "She's going to be a handful." "She's her mother's daughter," Caleb said proudly. The first night with Grace was a revelation. She was so small, so fragile, yet so completely real. They took turns holding her, marveling at her tiny features, her perfect fingers and toes, the way she rooted for food with single-minded determination. When Lillian nursed her for the first time, the sensation was strange and uncomfortable and absolutely right. "I never knew I could love someone this much this fast," Lillian said, watching Grace's little mouth work. "I thought what I felt for you was the most powerful thing I'd ever experienced. But this—" "I know," Caleb said, understanding perfectly. "It's different. Both are love, but this is something else entirely." As the days passed, they settled into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood. Grace was a demanding baby, waking every few hours to eat, crying when she was uncomfortable, requiring constant attention. Lillian was sore and tired and more content than she'd ever been in her life. Caleb was sleep-deprived and fumbling with diapers and completely besotted with his daughter. "I used to think the ranch was important," he said one night as he paced the floor with Grace, trying to get her to sleep. "The horses, the land, building something lasting, but none of that matters compared to this. To you two." "It matters," Lillian corrected from the bed, where she was trying to catch a few moments of rest. "But it matters because it's what we're building for her. A legacy. A home." When spring finally broke and the snow melted, revealing the valley green and alive with new growth, Caleb and Lillian brought Grace outside for the first time. She was 6 weeks old, bigger and more alert, her eyes tracking movement and her little mouth making cooing sounds that delighted them both. "This is your home, Grace," Lillian told her daughter, holding her up to see the mountains, the creek, the horses, and the pasture. "This is where your story begins, and it's a good story, a beautiful one. You'll grow up free and loved and safe. No one will ever tell you that you're not enough. No one will ever try to make you into something you're not." "She'll grow up knowing her own mind," Caleb added, wrapping his arm around Lillian's shoulders. "Knowing she has choices. Knowing she's loved not for what she can do for anyone else, but for exactly who she is." That Sunday, they took Grace to Silver Butte for her baptism. The whole town turned out, crowding into the small church to witness the blessing of the baby who'd been born to such extraordinary circumstances. Pastor Williams held Grace gently as he performed the ceremony, and when he handed her back to her parents, there wasn't a dry eye in the congregation. Afterwards, there was a celebration at the Colton house. Women cooed over Grace, offering advice and hand-me-down baby items. Men clapped Caleb on the back and joked about sleepless nights. It was warm and communal and exactly the kind of welcome Lillian had dreamed of when she first imagined coming west. "They're your family now," Martha told her as they watched the festivities. "All of us. That's what community means out here. We take care of our own. I never had this in Boston, Lillian said, bouncing Grace gently. Never had people who cared about me just because. It was always about what I could do for them, what advantage knowing me would bring. But here you're just Lillian Donovan, wife of Caleb and mother of Grace, and that's more than enough. As summer arrived, bringing long days and abundant growth, the ranch flourished. Caleb took on a young man named Thomas as a helper, which freed up more of his time to spend with Lillian and Grace. They fell into a new routine, one that revolved around the baby, but still left room for each other. Lillian discovered she could do ranch work with Grace strapped to her back in a sling Martha had made. The baby seemed to love being outside, watching the horses, listening to the creek. She's going to be a rancher like her father, Lillian observed one day as Grace's eyes tracked a horse walking by. She can be whatever she wants, Caleb said. Teacher like her mother wanted to be, rancher, doctor, anything. Grace grew quickly, hitting milestones that thrilled them both. Her first smile, directed at Caleb, made him cry. Her first laugh, a delighted gurgle when Lillian blew raspberries on her belly, became their favorite sound. By 6 months, she was sitting up, grabbing everything within reach, and showing a personality that was equal parts stubborn and sweet. She's definitely your daughter, Caleb teased one evening as Grace refused to go to sleep, fighting her exhaustion with determination. My daughter? She gets that stubborn streak from you. Pretty sure I got it from you. They laughed, and Grace finally surrendered to sleep, her little face relaxing into peaceful dreams. Watching her, Lillian felt a contentment so deep it bordered on disbelief. A year ago, she'd been trapped in Boston, beaten and desperate. Now she had everything, a husband who loved her, a daughter who was her whole world, a home that was truly hers. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Grace played with a wooden horse Caleb had carved, Lillian received an unexpected letter. The return address was Boston, but the handwriting wasn't Edward Hart's. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Dear Mrs. Donovan, it began. You don't know me, but I was a friend of your mother's. I recently learned that you left Boston under difficult circumstances and wanted to reach out. Your Uncle Edward passed away last month from a heart attack. His estate is being settled, and despite his claims that he disinherited you, the will makes no such provision. As his sole living relative, you are entitled to inherit everything, the house, the investments, a considerable sum of money. I've taken the liberty of hiring a lawyer on your behalf to manage the estate. If you wish to claim your inheritance, please contact me at the address below. If you prefer to renounce all claim, that is also your right. Either way, I wanted you to know that you are free of him now, in every sense. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. Sincerely, Eleanor Whitmore. Lillian read the letter twice, then handed it to Caleb without a word. He read it carefully, then looked at her. How do you feel? I don't know. Relief, mostly. He can't hurt me anymore. She paused. The money would change our lives. We could expand the ranch, hire more help, make sure Grace has everything she needs. We don't need his money to do that. We're doing fine on our own. I know we are, but... She looked down at Grace, who was chewing happily on the wooden horse. This is her birthright, her grandfather's estate. Maybe I should claim it for her sake. They talked it over for days, weighing options. Finally, Lillian wrote to Eleanor Whitmore with her decision. She would accept the inheritance, but it would all go into a trust for Grace. Not a penny would be used to change their current life. The money would be there for their daughter when she was older, to give her opportunities and choices. But the life they'd built together, the one they'd fought so hard for, that would remain theirs alone. Are you sure? Caleb asked after she sealed the letter. That's a lot of money to put away. I'm sure. We don't need Edward Hart's money to be happy. We already have everything that matters. As the years passed, the Donovan Ranch became known throughout Montana Territory for its fine horses and the family who ran it with integrity and skill. Grace grew from baby to toddler to a spirited little girl who could ride before she could read, who loved the horses as much as her parents did, who had her mother's determination and her father's gentle strength. They had more children, a son they named James who arrived 3 years after Grace, quieter and more thoughtful than his sister. Then twin girls, Emma and Rose, who filled the expanded cabin with chaos and laughter. The family grew, the ranch prospered, and Caleb and Lillian's love deepened with each passing year. Sometimes, in the quiet moments after the children were asleep, they'd sit on the porch and remember how it all began. Lillian would think about the terrified woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach with bruises on her face and hope in her heart. Caleb would remember the lonely rancher who'd almost given up on finding love again. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked one evening, years after Grace's birth. "Leaving Boston? Everything you gave up." Lillian looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Regret this? Our life? Our children? You? Sometimes I wonder if you'd have been happier with someone from your own world, someone who could give you culture and society and—" She stopped him with a kiss. "Caleb Donovan, you gave me something more valuable than all the culture in the world. You gave me freedom. You gave me choice. You gave me love without conditions or expectations. You saw me when I was broken and helped me put myself back together. You gave me a life worth living." She took his hand and placed it over her heart. "This is my world now. You and our children, and this ranch, and these mountains. I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Not even for Boston," he teased. "Especially not for Boston." They kissed as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in colors that never failed to take their breath away. From inside the cabin came the sound of children laughing, arguing over who got to tell the next story. The horses nickered softly in the barn. The creek sang its eternal song. Years later, when Grace was grown with children of her own, she asked her mother about that time. "Tell me the story again," she'd request, "about how you and Papa met." And Lillian would tell her, editing out the worst of the violence but keeping the essential truth. "I came west looking for safety and found so much more. I found home. I found purpose. I found your father, who taught me what real love looks like. And I found myself, the person I was always meant to be." "Were you scared?" Grace would ask, though she'd heard the story 100 times. "Terrified. But sometimes the things that scare us most are the things we need most. I was scared to leave Boston, scared to trust your father, scared to believe I deserved happiness. But I did it anyway, and that made all the difference." On a warm spring day, decades after that first terrifying arrival in Silver Butte, Caleb and Lillian sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They were older now, their hair silver, their hands weathered by years of work. But their love was stronger than ever, tempered by time and trials into something unbreakable. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Lillian said, her hand in Caleb's as it had been for 40 years. "What's that?" "That moment in the wagon, on the way here from town, when you first told me I was safe. When you said, 'You're not alone now.' That changed everything." "You changed everything," Caleb corrected. "You took a chance on a rancher you didn't know. You trusted me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. You were brave enough to build a new life. We built it together." "Together," he agreed, pulling her close. From the yard came a child's delighted shriek as Grace's daughter, named Lillian in honor of her grandmother, successfully mounted one of the gentle mares. The little girl waved triumphantly, and Lillian waved back, her heart full. She thought about the bruised, frightened woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach so many years ago, clutching a blood-stained note and barely daring to hope. She thought about everything that woman had survived, everything she'd overcome, everything she'd built. And she thought about the words that had changed her life, the promise that had been kept every single day since. "You're not alone now." She never had been again. As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the land they'd worked and loved and passed on to their children, Caleb and Lillian Donovan sat together in the home they'd made. Behind them was a past full of pain and struggle. Ahead was whatever time they had left, golden and precious. But right here, right now, was perfection. They'd found each other when both were broken. They'd healed together, fought together, built something beautiful together. They'd raised children who were strong and kind. They'd created a legacy that would outlast them both. And through it all, through every triumph and every trial, they'd kept the promise they'd made that first day in Silver Butte. They'd never let each other face the world alone. That was the real story, Lillian thought as Caleb's hand tightened around hers. Not about a mail-order bride or a lonely rancher, but about two people who chose each other again and again and again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Love wasn't a fever or a feeling. It was a choice you made every single day, and they'd chosen right. The end.